Bang.
Right. That is a bang.
I've actually got the clapper, Pete, but it's down here on the floor.
Don't worry about it.
I dropped it before the shot.
Oh.
Yeah. Well, we're lucky that the team here at CBOE got me on and all set up with, the Wi-Fi, the lights, and everything. And that pit behind me, Pete, that's the SPX now. And wow, doing a lot of volume and a lot of volume also in the VIX, which is just over to the other side. But great to be back here on CBOE, folks. Thank you for tuning in. This is the Rebel's Edge. He's Pete Najarian. I'm John Najarian. And of course, we have Jared handling all of the inserts that you see, everything from the clock to the date to the ticker to the dancing robots.
To the panels. I mean, the guy does it all. The guy's like, he's like a Swiss Army knife.
Pretty much. Well, thank you for tuning in, folks. And we hope to bring you more from the floor of CBOE. And it's, by the way, Pete, the name is CBOE Global Markets. They don't just go by CBOE anymore. It's CBOE Global Markets. So we appreciate all the work that they did to get us here. And we encourage any of your input about more shots from the floor and things like that, because it's pretty cool. All right.
I might be at Viking camp tomorrow. The Vikings and the Titans are going at it for a scrimmage, John, day 2. And if the times work, I might do it from over there just to add a little extra something.
Well, that would be pretty cool. I'm sure it'll stress Jared the heck out.
How the hell with him?
Let's screw him. Sorry, Jared. But folks, the Rebel's Edge, you know what we start with. We start with the macro minute. And today, Pete, my macro minute's going to be that at 2 o'clock Eastern time today, 1 o'clock Central, where I am here at CBOE Global Markets, we get the minutes from the Fed policy meeting that was last month. So that's going to be my macro minute, Pete. That could help drive the markets higher or sort of kneecap the markets, depending which way those minutes go.
Well, and on top of that, John, one of the things we both hit yesterday was some of the China data. And when you look at that China data, I think it's still lingering around. I mean, the fact that their GDP target or their growth target at 5% was something that they missed. There's a lot more going on when you look at the Chinese. And the problem, John, is they're the second largest economy in the world. And if they're stumbling around, that is not a good thing. And I think that's something that's kind of hanging on the markets right now. They talked about demand issues. They talked about a lot of different things. There's a lot more that we need to unpack about China right now than I think meets the eye.
Well, and I'm going to drop us right into fantastic futures, Pete.
Yeah.
Fantastic futures.
Well, and they were fantastic earlier in the day, Pete. I'm going to say that the 10-year, when it was feeling a little soft, a little squishy, in other words, heading down from 4.21% down into the teens again, that was good. Now that it's moved back up, it's not so good, and all 3 major indices are lower.
Yeah, I'm going to give you lumber, John, because right over at the CME, right across the street from where you are right now at the Chicago Board Options Exchange, Global, it's something that if you go back to May, John, in the middle of May 12th, it was 440. That was the price. The beginning of August, it was 500. Now it's 520. That's something to keep an eye on because it's something we talk about a lot is all the different things that you don't think about. I mean, we all know food, we know energy, we know gas. You brought up wheat and corn. Lumber is not talked about a lot since the pandemic, but it's something that you better start focusing on if it continues at this trajectory.
Yeah, well, I think anybody in the home building space, Pete, is betting along with you that hopefully we don't see a lot higher prices out of lumber. Right. But there are, I'm sure, a lot of lumber bulls that are saying it could go a lot higher. All right, let's talk about DLocal, Pete, which is DLO. This is a payment processing platform globally. And they had 2 bits of news. One, they beat on their earnings estimates. And it's not every day you see a big multi-billion-dollar stock up over 50%. But that's what's happening here today. They grabbed basically Mercado Libre's former CEO or CFO rather, to step in. And that appears to be, along with the great earnings, why the stock is just zooming today.
Well, and I'll tell you, John, when you put up volume that's up 80% year over year, that's going to always be something that people see and say, wait just a minute, this thing is really rocking. It is rocking. It's up, it's only up like 50, 52% or something like that on the day. On top of the news that you just talked about, I read one other thing, John. If you just go back a day or two ago and you take a look, there was a little bit of news out there that I don't think very many people paid attention to, but they're exploring a potential sale. Imagine that. I'm not saying it's going to happen, but they're at least exploring it. And I think the combination of that and the earnings and the growth that they've got, they are moving, and they're moving in a big way to the upside.
Yeah, and Pete, luckily we had unusual activity in this one. Now, it played out already, but they hadn't taken it off. And by that I mean, folks, when people buy options, the great thing about it is they give you a time frame because there's the expiration, in this case, August expiration, and they give you a strike price. They had been buying the 15 calls when the stock was at 10 back in June. Well, the stock climbed, went to 15, and then today we saw that 50% jump to the upside. Those options, we've rolled them several times, and after today's number, given that they haven't pushed this thing out further into the future, Pete, we took the profits and said, thank you very much. These options expire in 2 days. We're not going to be that foolish as to hold on all the way to expiration for this one. But remember, you want a BOGO, that's buy one, get one free. You can go to marketrebellion.com/bang. That's what we always direct you to, because there you can get a BOGO. You pay for 1 month, you get second month free, and you get trades like that one. So DLocal really outperforming like crazy today. Let's talk now. Go ahead.
Well, I'll mention this, John. They 10x'd on volume today in the first 2 hours. And speaking of 10xing, this thing did a lot more than a 10x when you really look at where things were, where the stock was, where these options were, and where they've actually reached to today. So a marvelous move in this stock that was absolutely triggered with some of that unusual option activity.
I agree, Pete. Now let's talk about Target, because Brian Cornell's a friend of yours. And I'm not saying I dislike the man. For the most part, I think he's done a fabulous job. But a lot of these companies were chasing that scoring that S&P Global and others were doing, as far as, how inclusionary are you and this and that. That's important. But I think the important thing when you're running a retailer is not to offend your clients. And apparently that was one of the issues. Obviously, a lot of value has been erased from this great company based in Minneapolis, where Pete hangs out most of the summer. But today, Pete, they came out, they slashed full year profit margins, but they said they were off to a strong start in Q3. So the stock was up about 8% and then quickly gave that up. Where do you think it goes from here?
Well, and I'm glad you pointed that out, because I was looking at the same thing, John. I mean, when you look at the 52-week and you see 124 on the low end, 125, 181 on the higher end for 52 weeks, and even on this big move and then that slide, you're still pushing against that 52-week low, at least relatively close. I thought that there was some interesting things that were said. I think the reason it popped during the day, because I think that full year 2024 is what people were grasping onto. And they talked about the traffic being higher and all the rest of that. But I think the big problem was, hey, look, when you talk about 2023 and the outlook for those profits, that's a little bit uncomfortable. People are going to have to wait. And I think they're figuring that out. I think it hovers around down here for a while. And I think it's going to take time. And their biggest competition, Walmart, is going to be coming out and giving their numbers, and that's going to be an interesting one. Tomorrow is right. Yep.
That's right. Those numbers will be interesting, and that's a comp that everybody looks at, that comparison between traffic and as far as inventories, and if you had to cut prices to move inventory, all that sort of thing. All right, Pete, let's talk about H&R Block, HRB. This one, they beat on top line big time. They beat on bottom line big time. They raised the dividend 10%. it's hard to imagine that they could do too many more things right. And the stock's up 9%. But this is one of those areas where I'm sure they will employ AI or artificial intelligence. But the more that other competitors can do that, like Intuit and so forth, that might not be so good for H&R Block. But for today, it's working.
Well, and I will say this, John, you know, this is the old commercial, H&R Block, and everybody's like, huh? So I'll tell you, these guys, you can't crush it. You can't beat it. You can't do anything better than what they put up. I mean, those numbers across the board are a good reason why that stock had about a 9% move to the upside. When you deliver on the earnings and the revenue wasn't as big a beat, but the earnings certainly were. 205 versus 189. That's a major beat. But the one thing you didn't mention as well, and we always do bring this up, how was that guidance? The guidance was pretty damn good. They're expecting this to continue to roll on and on and on. H&R Block's making a hell of a move today, but I don't think they're done. And if I was in there right now, I might buy puts to hold on to my stock a little longer because they're probably very cheap right now post earnings. And the fact that, hey, look, that gives me a little bit of an insurance policy to the downside and let this son of a gun ride.
Well, that one, Pete, is very impressive with what they've managed to do. And the fact that this encompasses or includes the tax filing season, of course, which is April 15th. Whether you file for an extension or not, you got to give them your money. And then you can file for the extension on the actual posting up of those numbers. But yeah, they don't give you a break on whether you give them the money or not. Let's talk about Coherent, Pete, because this one is down huge. Why? Well, they beat on profit, which was 41 cents versus 38. Well, they beat on revenue, so in other words, sales, but the guidance was way worse than the street was looking for. They guided to 5 cents to as much as 20 cents versus a 46-cent estimate. So in other words, you're saying at best, we might do half of what you guys are looking for, and maybe we'll only do 1/8 of what you guys are looking for. That is pretty ugly, Pete, and that's why the stock's down 30+%.
Yeah, and it almost feels like it's overboard as far as like, hey, man, are they really going to hit this thing that far down? But to your point, it all matters about guidance. How are you going to guide? And when you look at this guidance and you go, holy smokes, they don't expect this thing to be anywhere near where they were expecting. And that's a problem because with those estimates for the earnings at 45 cents, and they're saying somewhere between a nickel and 20 cents, that's first of all, that's a fairly wide band right there. Second of all, that is it, like you said, at least at best it's half of where it is, and at worst it could be a real problem. So this is one of those names that's getting hammered today for all the right reasons. Is it going to stay down here? Likely. I think it probably hovers around this lower end for a while. They're going to have to put out some kind of good news somewhere in the next couple of months ahead of earnings, or this thing is really in trouble. And when I say trouble, it's already right there in the peak of trouble when you look where it is versus the 52-week.
Yeah, when you're hearing them say things like, we don't see any signs of meaningful rebound even into next year, Pete, that's pretty negative. Ouch. All right, well, what do you got as far as the NFL and some sports headlines, Pete?
Well, I thought it would be fun today, John, because, you know, we talk about football a lot. You and I both used to play football. You played with the Bears. I played with the Vikings and the Bucks and the Seattle and Oakland, all those different places. But, you know, the problem is I wasn't good enough, so they just kept trading me from one to the other, to the other, to the other, to the other. So that's how that whole thing goes. Who didn't get cut or didn't get traded is Anthony Richardson. Now, he's an interesting one, and here's what I want to pose to you, John. What would you do with this kid? Because the Colts made a decision. They not only drafted him with the 4th pick in the entire draft, but they are very excited after just seeing him in one, I think it was just a couple of plays in a preseason game, and they've said, you know what? You are our starting quarterback this year. Now, he's a big, strong kid. We know the athleticism, but let me just give you a couple numbers that might make you say, well, wait a minute. Are they a little in front of themselves right now? So he's only had 13 starts in his college career. He's only played in 19 games total in his college career. And by the way, when he did this, John, he's about a 54% completion rate. That's not very good for people who don't understand the numbers. That's terrible. I mean, you want to be somewhere 60 to 70% completion rate. Then you're starting to look at it and saying, all right, this guy's got something. But his athletic ability is absolutely unmatched. I mean, the guy's 6'5", 255 pounds, runs a 4.4 40. He's got all these things that most guys don't have that are quarterbacks. By the way, he can run, and he averaged it was only 6 yards a carry in college, but that's not so bad, I wouldn't say. So what do you think? Would you have him start, or would you have him maybe sit the first couple of games, learn from Gardner Minshew, was the starter until now, and let him get more used to it? Or do you think it's time to say, you know what, this is the starter, he's starting week 1, just like Peyton Manning? I mean, it's interesting because it is just like Peyton Manning, but it's also Andrew Luck. Both of them started week 1. So what would you do?
Well, when I look at this guy, Pete, obviously a ton of talent. You already described that. His pain threshold must be extremely high, because I don't think he's got a space on his body other than his face that isn't tattooed. So pain threshold wise, he's the Florida Gators quarterback. He impressed the hell out of them at the combine, which happens to be right in the Colts' backyard. It's in their dome. It's where they do the combine and so forth. Work ethic, the kid is great. So I can't fault him there at all, Pete. He is just a phenomenal athlete. And, of course, the talent needs to be developed because, to your point, 54% completion average in college ain't cutting it in the pros. In fact, that gets you cut in the pros. But fairness to him, he hasn't played a professional game yet other than, some action in the preseason. So do I think he can do it? Sure. It's going to depend on how much the quarterback coach and the veterans can help him out. But this is a risk, and he's doing it against the Bears, Pete. So that's another interesting thing.
Yeah, he's got a hell of an offensive line. Jonathan Taylor is back. He's had some issues, the running back, who's one of the great running backs in the NFL right now. So I think some pieces are there for him on the offense. Defense struggled last year. We'll see how they do. I think the Colts are a very interesting team at best right now. I don't know if they're ready to take over in the division because they got a pretty competitive group of teams there. All right, John, we're going to jump to the Ravens now. We're sticking with the NFL because you've got a hell of a lot of guys behind you that are jumping up and down and screaming and yelling and doing all the trading. And a lot of those guys played either in the NFL, the NBA, the NHL. People don't realize it, but if you've got a good brain and you're a sports guy and you've got that discipline and all the rest of the things that come with it, trading is a great place to be. And there's a lot of those guys standing behind you, jumping up and down. It's great to be at the CBOE. Lamar Jackson's an interesting cat, John, because he knows football as good as anybody. He did win a Heisman Trophy, by the way. He was a pretty daggone first-round, first-pick guy. But the guy is very, very interesting and very smart. And, oh, by the way, he represented himself on a contract that was one of the biggest contracts ever in the NFL. So he's a pretty smart guy. Here's what I like. He's been giving the offensive coordinator ideas. And he's a brand-new offensive coordinator. They've gotten together, and he's like, hey, look, I think in this formation we should run these routes. I think under these circumstances we should run these plays. What I love is a coach who's willing to listen. That tells me the coach is not an egotistical jackrabbit. And it tells me that Lamar's a guy who's working his craft. He understands it. We know he can run. He can hand it off. He can throw the ball the length of the field. But give the guy the opportunity to do what he wants to do. Kind of like Patrick Mahomes, by the way, who does a lot of this as well. So what do you think? Is this a good idea, bad idea? What do you think about a quarterback kind of telling the OC, hey, this is what we should do?
I think it's a great idea, Pete. When you got a guy like a Peyton Manning, and obviously I'm not quite saying that Lamar Jackson is Peyton Manning. He's got a ton of talent. But I think that the issue here is that he actually watches a ton of film. And he watches how people turn their bodies when they are going to, understand that a receiver is likely to break to the outside rather than the inside and so forth. And then, if the quarterback and the receiver are on the same page, the receiver can turn his body as if he's making that move, gets the corner's shoulders turned just enough that he can cut back to the inside and get that pass. That is something that, for instance, there's a Netflix special right now with Johnny Football, right? Johnny Manziel. And he didn't watch a lick of film, Pete. That's one of the big things that you learn when you watch that is, number one, he's kind of an arrogant you-know-what, but also he didn't do his homework at all. He was just pure talent, was Johnny Manziel. All of a sudden, you got a guy like this that loves watching film and loves trying to figure out how to beat people. So if I'm the offensive coordinator, I love that. Now, I don't want him overruling me on a lot of my plays because I'm listening to him. He's got to listen to me too. But Lamar doesn't seem to have that ego to where, Pete, he wouldn't understand that, hey, we got to set up this play before we go to that play. And I think that the kid's extremely talented, very smart. And I think Lamar, like you said, Pete, Heisman Award winner, very few people can run with this kid. As well as, just a cannon of an arm. So, yeah, I would listen to Lamar Jackson.
Yeah, and I'll tell you this, maybe Kyler Murray should sort of listen up about what's going on and watching film and all the rest of that, being kind of a Johnny Manziel sort of a guy, right? I mean, he's short. He kind of thinks he's the greatest thing in the world. He got a big contract and doesn't watch film. I mean, what the hell? So, he should take a page from what we're seeing from Lamar Jackson, who he is tenacious and intelligent and a hell of a quarterback who could turn into the Ravens into a pretty interesting team this year.
Absolutely. I agree, Pete. Well, folks, we appreciate all of you tuning in. We certainly appreciate our friends at CBOE Global Markets letting us use this great facility right here. And hopefully we'll be back here tomorrow, and Pete might be over at Vikings training camp just to make Jared's hairstyle look more like Pete's and mine. In other words, he'll be pulling his hair out, trying to coordinate all of that. But please join us tomorrow at 1 p.m. Eastern time, folks. Till then, see you then.